Hi, welcome to the CEO podcast. Today we have Adrienne Johnston here. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Please tell us about yourself, what you do, who you are, where you're from.
Thanks, Brittany. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Adrienne Johnston. I live in Seattle, Washington. I'm a graphic designer who specializes in presentation design. So I help clients specifically design their presentations in PowerPoint to better tell their story, whether that's funding for a pitch deck, whether that's a keynote presentation. It really spans the gamut. I mean, even if it's something as simple as like staff meeting slides. Those usually don't get, unless it's a really big company, they usually don't get funding for having someone professionally design them. But some of the big companies, even then, it's important enough if they've got 500 people on a Zoom call to make sure that the message is getting across.
Interesting. So I decided, like when we spoke before, I thought it was really interesting, especially for creative entrepreneurs who are listening to this podcast. I think one of the most important things for us is being able to tell our clients and present to our clients in a way that they understand. And as an interior designer, it's something that is troublesome a lot of the time to actually get the message across. I'm so sorry, guys. It's 5 o'clock here. So like everyone's coming home. I'm gonna have to lock them up or go downstairs. It's very hard to get the message across and also like be clear in a way that you're being creative, but also being able to be like, no, I'm showing you this because of like this specific thing. Whereas sometimes clients will look at it and see something totally different. So talk to us a little bit about like your process behind how you take somebody's like creative ideas and actually put them into something that other people are going to understand.
Yeah, so my background is interesting. I don't come at it from a design perspective. I come at it from a very analytical perspective. My bachelor's degree is in chemistry. And so I spent undergraduate working in PowerPoint, trying to figure out how do I show these results in a meaningful way. And then after that, it became, okay, now how do I also make them look attractive, right? So there was an aesthetic element to it as well. And so I would say I really approach it that way. What's the story that we're trying to tell? What's the meaningful thing? I come out of like that academic research environment. But a lot of people come at it from, this super high level where they have all this information in their head, so many things they want to tell their audience, whoever that is. If it's an employer, a manager trying to tell their staff something, right? We're going to have a staff meeting. I'm going to give you all this information. The reality is people can only hold so much information, especially now, right? We got our phones blowing up, all these things around us distracting us. And so you really have to get to the meat of the matter really fast. What do people really care about? How do you say that and visualize that in a way that's really going to make people pay attention? And we know that people actually store information so much better visually, right? If they see it, there's some story that goes with it, and then there's some visual that ties it all together. They're able to actually store that information and retain it. And so if you can take their slides and help them really take that information, as opposed to, I think really academics are the worst at this and researchers, because they have all this data, right? And it's to them, the data is so important. And you're like, except to no one else cares. That data was meaningful to you, but to everybody else, it's the so what. That kind of what's in it for me, what's the outcome, tell me why it matters, because I can't possibly understand that level of detail of sigma and epsilon and delta. Like, don't care, doesn't matter. And so you just really help them say, like, get to the so what. And you can give them the data, the quick overview. That may be a chart and maybe a quick graph, but it doesn't need to be 30 graphs. They don't need to know that you did 50 different research experiments to get here. But people are proud of that, right? That's their life's work. And so it's really hard for them sometimes to step back and look and see the forest through the trees, because that's what they're in all day long.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that especially I'm like going at it from where I come from, that's exactly it. Like we're like, okay, so we did like this tiny little detail here. And it's like the client at the end of the day, they appreciate that, but they also just want to see kind of like what's the kitchen actually going to look like and how's it going to work, and not be kind of bogged down with too many things that they're like, oh, why did you have, that sample in the board if you're not actually using that fabric? And you're like, oh, well, it's just the vibe. We're pulling it together. And it's hard to translate that sometimes. What would you say kind of the top 3 things you do would be for like clarity? Like, what are the top 3 rules you follow to like maintain clarity?
Yeah, I think the first thing, right, is simplify. Like, get rid of all the extraneous garbage, things that aren't actually adding to the story or are going to be extraneous, and that's audience dependent. Some people, to your point, like with fabric swatches, Some clients are going to be perfectly capable of looking at it. Like I have a friend who's like this. She would look at it and she'd be like, I love that vibe. If you gave me something that wasn't going to be in there, I'd be like really into that specific thing and get too focused on it. And so you have to know who you're talking to and then be able to like figure out what's extraneous to that audience in particular. And then I would say hierarchy, particularly in presentations. So many presentations are used for two purposes. You'll see them in like these big keynote stages, right? We think like Steve Jobs announcing the iPhone. Most people's slides don't look like that. Everybody says I want a Steve Jobs presentation, but the reality is people aren't out there introducing the iPhone. Their stuff is way more complicated than that. They're selling a lot more details than that. And so if you can have a quick headline with big text and then the details, because what they're usually doing with these decks is they're taking them and they're handing them off to people after the fact. So they're both serving as a big stage document, but they're also serving as like a PDF takeaway after the fact. So it has to be able to stand on its own without that voiceover. And then third, I think, it's really, for me, it's about, I guess it kind of aligns to your fabric swatches as well, right? It's about the branding. It's about the vibe. How do you make sure that you're really pulling that in and making sure that it's aligned and cohesive across the board? So from fabric swatch to fabric swatch and from slide to slide, graph to graph, like as an example, like researchers they're doing all these different analyses on different machines. And so they have these graphs, but each graph is coming out of a different machine and it looks totally different. You can't use those graphs. It's too distracting to the audience trying to figure out why does this look different from that? So you have to redraw them and give them some uniformity. And it's the same kind of thing for you, right? Like you can't have like, I guess maybe you can. There's some way you're tying it all together. But I was gonna say you can't have like a crazy like McDonald's kitchen and then some like super zen spa like living room, right? Like
No, for sure you can. And I totally get what you mean. Even in terms of the slides, like we try to present each, if we're doing it in a mood board style, we try to keep it like all the scale kind of the same. And like, so that people, when they're looking from room to room, they're like, okay, they put light fixtures in the top left corner. So like in the living room, in the kitchen, in all the spaces, it's like top left corners, light fixtures, bottom right corners, sofas. Keeping that consistent, it just helps them not to miss anything throughout the presentation, which is so important. You do a lot for people that are showing like data. If you are showing more of an aesthetic type of thing, what would you recommend? Is there a certain number of items that should be on a page or like a certain max of text? Like, are there rules like that should be followed?
there are rules. They get broken all the time. It's really dependent on what you need to say and what you need to convey and the space you have to say it. So I think, general rules, you don't ever want to go less than 10 or 12 point font. That's resume font, right? So you really think about how small that is if you were to print it and hand it to someone. We're not doing a lot of printing anymore, most of us. It's mostly digital. But you think about how small that is, relatively speaking. I would also say, like, kind of think about what your medium is. Like with Zoom, some fonts won't show up if you do anything too thin of a line weight or too small of a font. Like it almost gets lost. So if you don't have enough contrast. Same thing with your pictures. Like if you're ending up putting like a tiny thumbnail because you're trying to put so much on one slide, then you're better off saying, okay, like we're going to actually, PowerPoint has a really cool feature that you might love if you had a situation like this where you have so much information on a slide. You can zoom into particular parts of the slide. It's called zoom under the insert feature. And so you can zoom in. And so
While
you
you're
still have
presenting?
so you still have like the overall context,
Okay.
but then you get that like sense of like, we're going
Oh,
into something. It's kind of
okay.
like if you've ever used Prezi, they have like this kind of you're moving around feature. Their whole model is built on that, but PowerPoint does that as well. Most people just don't know how to use it. We think of it as kind of linear, but it really does have this kind of very cool like morph and that can be a really cool feature to use because it gives you that ability again to be grounded in one thing, but then to go deeper and get that visibility. So yeah, I would just say like as long as it's legible and coherent, I think that's what's important. And so many people they forget about that, right? Especially when you know the material because you're like, oh, I know what that little sconce looks like, even though it's teeny tiny over there. But if the client doesn't know, and so one thing I recommend to people is it's hard to do this, but to build enough time into your process that you can walk away from something for 24 hours and come back with fresh eyes and say, if I were the client, how would I feel if I saw this?
That's really good
Right? Would I be
advice.
overwhelmed?
Yeah.
Do I feel like I'm grounded in this? Or like, I'm like, oh, this is too much. And then just kind of break it up.
Okay, cool. When we had first initially chatted, we had talked a bit about AI, and a lot of people are worried about AI. They're scared it's going to take our jobs away. They're scared that it's going to, start to design whole rooms and create furniture shopping lists and basically do your job for you. What would you say about how AI is being used now, and what are some of the benefits that we can see there, and how to use it in terms of like making our lives easier versus like taking our jobs?
Yeah, I think it's like anything when you kind of go back and look at these revolutions that have, changed the landscape. I have a friend whose father was a hand illustrator before Adobe Illustrator came out. And I mean, she said almost overnight their entire business changed, right? People didn't want hand illustrations anymore. Everybody could go into Illustrator and do digital illustrations. And so they had to change their business model. And I think AI, we're on the precipice of that, right? At some point, our jobs will change. I think those of us who've used AI can confidently say we're still a ways off. If you've really gotten in there and you've really played with it, you go, ooh. I think there's a lot of legislation that's going to happen, right? Especially the design side of AI is all built on other people's intellectual property.
Very true.
I mean, how that shakes out, I think is going to be really interesting to watch. So for me, I haven't been scared of it. I think whatever happens, happens. There's so little that we'll be able as individuals to do to influence it. I think being open to watching what's happening, exploring it, understanding it as opposed to being afraid, and saying, how do I leverage that, to your point, to better enhance my workflow? So I think, I've been using like Chat GPT to help me like write blog posts or to write emails, but I don't do it in a generic kind of way, right? I say like, hey, I want to write this thing and I want it to include all of these points, right? I don't want some generic content. I want it to be the thing I'm thinking of, but I want you to help me write it. And then after it writes it, I take it back and I say, okay, now how do I make it sound more like me? How do I like continue to refine it? And so for me, it actually helps me a lot because it kind of gets me out of that like hovering over the keyboard, like what's next? If that makes sense. It's so much easier to edit sometimes, especially if you're not a writer.
Yeah, no,
To
I would
create.
absolutely agree with that. I personally, I think AI is great the way it is now. I use it for the same thing, like blog posts, emails, especially like email list type of emails, but also I use it a lot to like make my emails nicer
Yeah.
because it's something like if say a client comes and they're like arguing about something or whatever it might be, it allows me to actually like write back what I am feeling, and versus like taking like the 24 hours away to be like, oh, is that too harsh? Should I say that? Blah, blah, blah. I like throw it in Chat GPT. I'm like, make this nicer. And it's like, and it does, a great job. So I use it quite a bit for that. If I'm feeling like I'm not being kind of, what's the right word? Like political enough, like when I'm dealing with like issues that arise. So I find that super helpful. We're creating some courses right now that I have been, just using it to kind of expand on content, which is really helpful as well. But you're completely right. You have to be able to go in and be able to edit it. So that's like the number one thing. You can't just like take what it spits out and throw it in and be like, that's fine. Because a lot of times you can tell when something's been written by ChatGPT. Like they use certain words that like aren't that popular to use in like language these days. I was driving the other day and I saw like a billboard out front of like a tattoo studio, and it was like, unleash your artistry. And I was like, that's AI. Like they just they use like weird words like unleash and journey and artistry, and like a lot of these words you can literally pick them out and that's what it is. So definitely edit what it pops out, but it is a good tool to kind of jump forward in like content creation a lot of the time.
I love that. A friend of mine said too, she said, I wonder if it's not actually going to help us expand our vocabulary and use words that we haven't been using because we've almost, in some ways, become kind of lazy. I mean, not only that, but obviously our colloquial vocabulary is expanding. But she's like, I found myself now using these words because they are kind of coming back out in the mainstream because people are throwing them out there kind of blindly in
Yeah,
situations like that, not even thinking about it.
absolutely.
So I think it'll be interesting to see, right? What's that influence? There will be so much that we won't even realize until 10 or 20 years from now.
Yeah, for sure. I found it useful too on the design side. Not obviously like you can't create like specific spaces. Like it's not intelligent enough yet where you're like, I have a 20 by 20 room and I need to fit cabinets in it, make that work. It's like, can't do that. But it's great if you're like, we have a client right now that's moving from Hong Kong. And so there is a language barrier for us. And they were saying like, we want this kind of kitchen. And we were like Googling what they were saying, and we're like, that doesn't really make sense. Like, it's not translating properly. And so I went to Chat GPT and I'm like, okay, make me a modern kitchen with like warm colors. And that spat out something that I was like, okay, yeah, that's kind of the vibe. And then I sent it to them and they were like, yeah, okay, we get like the direction. So it's good, especially for designers. Like, we use Pinterest a lot, right? We pull other people's stuff off Pinterest and go, so something like this, but then with this layout and then this fabric and then this, and then like combine it all together. So it is useful in those scenarios. But I do think your point to like the intellectual property is very interesting, because I hadn't thought about that before. And that's going to be like, obviously, you're not actually going to be able to use it. Like, all the people that are like, oh, I'll write a book on ChatGPT. It's like, I don't know how that actually works, because aren't they just taking like parts of other people's books and like smashing them together?
Yeah, well, and then you also have to wonder, even there's a disclosure language on Chat GPT of like, don't guarantee any of this is accurate. A friend and I are working on a webinar with some content in it, and she did some research and pulled some stats from Chat GPT. And I went back and I was like, I need to source these stats. So I asked Chat GPT, where can I find a source for this? And it's like, actually, I don't think that actually exists. And so it's like, that's not actually right. And so it's just, it kind of gives you crazy stuff.
Yeah.
There's no
Because it
source
just
for it.
kind of scours the internet and just is like, oh, that says what you want it to say. And that says what you want it to
Yes.
say. And who knows who wrote it? Like, it could be coming from a complete, like, like fake news website, and just being like, that's the real thing right there. So
Exactly.
yeah,
And like when I was pushing it, it would like eventually get me to things that were kind of sort of related, but it wasn't really, it was very tangential.
yeah, yeah. So I think the bottom line here is you can definitely use ChatGPT as a tool. AI is a great tool, but it still is not, advanced enough that it's really going to take the place of like the human brain and being able to translate kind of real information. It's really just a tool to kind of help you get there faster.
Agreed. But I totally think that people should be using it, especially anybody with, 10 to 15 years left in their career. Start getting comfortable with it, understanding what it is, so that as it's evolving, you can evolve your skill set with it and just be comfortable. I feel like in so many design groups I'm in, I see people going, I'm just not going to use it. I'm opposed for whatever reason because of the copyright issues, or because people are going to end up unemployed and things like this. And you're just like, but you also don't want to get left behind, and you don't want to be the one who's underemployed, because
Yeah.
now AI is a huge component of our jobs and you don't have that skill set. So that's what I worry about for people, is that they're just almost cutting off their nose to spite their face. Like, this is happening. You may
Yeah.
not like it. Change is hard, but like, we have to get on board or you will get left behind, right? That's the reality.
Yes, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about like what your day job looks like. Like, obviously you're using PowerPoint a lot, you're doing presentations for people. What do you like enjoy about it as a creative entrepreneur yourself? Kind of what is it that kind of keeps you going every day?
Yeah, I mean, this job in particular, I think is really perfect for me, but I think is also a really interesting job in that it is really this blend of like a creative role and an analytical role. It's analytical in the sense we talked about, like the data and the storytelling and the kind of understanding people's messaging and then being able to elevate it and determine what's important. But two, PowerPoint is its own kind of like technical tool. And so many designers just don't like PowerPoint, right? It's not a real design tool. I got my air quotes for those people who can't see it. But like, most people hate PowerPoint, right? Like there's the whole like stigma around it. Designers don't like it because it's not a true traditional design tool. And there are real nuances to using it and building it the right way. And that's why so many people get frustrated with it. And so like learning how to use it the right way and to make it work for you, like with the Zoom feature and these things, and being able to deliver something to people and they go, oh, I didn't know PowerPoint could do that, right? This high utility tool that we use, even I would say I probably use 50 to 60% of, like, it's so robust that you can build calculators in it. You can do all of these like really cool things in it. And so for me, as somebody who's kind of identifies as creative, but I've always kind of almost leaned more towards this analytical side, like with a background in chemistry. Like I've really struggled for a lot of years to go creative, because yeah, I came from that world, and it really allows me to kind of dabble in both of those and then get to have these like really fun relationships with people who think the same way. Like there are people who care enough about the design, but are also people who are out fundraising to figure out how do we remove all this carbon from the air so that, the planet doesn't burn up in the next 50 years. And people who are, just doing really cool things, and they have these really technical smarts, and they know that it's important that things look good. And I feel like so many designers, you feel like, I'm not sure how much you see this in your fields with interior design. I feel like so many graphic designers are like, people don't appreciate design anymore. They
Mhm.
take it for granted. They're like, oh, it's easy. I could do that in 10 minutes or whatever. And the reality is that these are people who both care about the world, but also appreciate that the design is going to have an impact, and it's going to change their ability to be taken seriously, to get the fundraising that they need, to secure the clients that they want, whatever it is, that it has
Yeah,
impact.
it's kind of a nice balance you get, because you get kind of that, you get to learn all about this research and all about these cool new things that are coming to market, but you also get to kind of present it. And in order to present it properly, you have to understand it. So you're getting a lot of learning, and then you're getting to be creative, but still using your like structural analytical side to be creative, because it has to be like well structured to be received properly. So I like that, how that's all kind of layered its way together. On the topic of PowerPoint, my lead designer who works for me is obsessed with PowerPoint. Like, whereas we'll all use like CAD, or like I use SketchUp personally to do like a 3D rendering, like she fully like goes in and does PowerPoint. So I just wanted to share, I don't know if I can share my screen with you. I just wanted to show you one of our presentations
Oh
to
my
get
gosh,
your
I'm so
like
excited.
your real feedback on it in real time. This will be posted on YouTube too. So for anyone listening on the podcast, like maybe just kind of describe what you're seeing. But some of this was created in PowerPoint. So I want to
Oh my
show
gosh,
it
I'm
to
so
you.
excited. You have no idea.
Okay. Can you see?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Okay. So like when we present to a client, these are like the first boards that we give them. So we do it in a way that's like taking other rooms that exist, usually from Pinterest, and then throwing in things like pieces of furniture and like rough floor plan layouts to kind of show our ideas. And then we include, small type and stuff to express kind of what we're showing them in that space.
Oh my gosh, I love this so much.
So that's kind of like, this is what the client gets off the bat, to be like, here in your kitchen, like we have these ideas, like we're just sharing ideas at this point. None of this is like exactly what the kitchen will look like. It's more like we're going to do. So here we've written, create a range hood that has a detail that's found around the rest of the home and pulls each room together with a texture. So it's like, this is an idea of a texture. It's not maybe the exact texture you're going to end up doing, but it's like, do you like that idea? Pretty much.
Yeah.
And then once we've moved through this with our client, then we move into more of, this was created in PowerPoint, for example. So then
Created that
these are,
PowerPoint.
yeah,
That's remarkable.
she does very cool stuff. We have a tutorial that'll be part of our course that teaches people how to do this in PowerPoint. Cause I looked at her and I'm like, you made that in PowerPoint? And she's like,
Yeah.
oh, I love PowerPoint. And I'm like, okay, whatever floats your boat, whatever works for you. But this is kind of where we get to the point where we show like the actual products that the client's going to be able to choose from. So as you can see, it gets a little cleaner and a little more specific once we
Yeah.
get to this point of time. And like I said before, kind of we group things in certain areas. So it's not like a chair over here, a chair over there. It's like, here are the
Yeah.
3 options for a chair. Here are the 3 options for lighting, type of thing. And again, still using verbiage to explain where we're at, what we're doing.
I love it.
And
I
then
love
here
the
we're,
amount of white space. I like
okay.
how it doesn't feel overwhelming, which I think it's funny because you're like, oh, it gets cleaner. I'm like, this whole thing has been so clean.
Yay.
Like, I mean, it's beautiful.
Thank you. And here we're showing kind of different options for the kitchen. So like here you've got different lower colored cabinetry. Here you've got kind of a different backsplash than here. So we're showing kind of 3 different options that people can see in one space, so that they can see like which one their eye is drawn towards the most. Because we do a lot of our design discussions and concept revisions virtually. So clients will get access to this on kind of our portal that we use, and then they can like approve and decline things as they go.
Oh, wow.
So again, this is totally made in PowerPoint just by like pasting in images and then creating like a 3D drawing with, I guess she uses lines and squares from what she's told me.
That's so impressive. I can't even imagine. I really
Well,
struggle with 3D perspectives.
okay.
I could never be an illustrator. I'm like, it doesn't make sense to me.
So
Oh, that's
I
amazing.
yeah, so I think it's pretty cool, but I guess my question for you would be, so you said you like the white space, you like how clean it is. Is there anything else that you would feel is missing in terms of like the presentation aspect for a client? Like if you were the design client receiving that, would you feel anything was missing knowing what you know about presentations?
Missing. How do you kind of set it up beforehand? Like as you're sitting down to kind of start the conversation? Because we jumped right in.
So
Is there any
typically
kind of framing?
it's given to them virtually. So they would just get an email that says, here are your mood boards to show kind of the initial conceptual designs. Please go through them, make comments. So the tool we use, you can actually click on images within the presentation and like leave a comment, or you can, each image that's kind of laid into the presentation is its own item if you scroll down.
Okay.
So
So
I'll
they
show
can make
you.
notes and things.
Yeah, so they can, I'll show you that again too. So they can like decide if they want to like, so here they can go down and kind of see each item on its own and kind of like approve it, decline it, that sort of thing.
Oh, I love that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's
think the
pretty
only thing
cool.
would be just kind of how are you framing it up at the beginning? So if there was like, I don't know how many rooms you're doing at a time or like what that is, but if it was like, this is the living room and to your specifications, like this was the theme we were going for, blah, blah, blah. I like to always kind of set things up with, I want to make sure you understand that I understood what you wanted. So
Yes,
we're
yes, that's
starting from,
hard.
yeah, it is. But if you're, as long as you're doing that someplace else, then, and there is a way for them to see it if it's in the email or someplace else, then I think that's great.
Yeah, we'll use Loom, which is a video recording tool for that. And sometimes I'll quickly scroll through the presentation on Loom and then send that link and be like, here's your presentation, here's a quick video. And then I'm like, okay, this is what you're looking at. This is what we're doing. This is what's different. This is kind of like what you need to decide on. And then they have time to kind of like go through it on their own, give feedback. And then after all that happens, then they come in for in person where they like can touch and feel and see like all the finishes together in real life. So we do kind of a hybrid model of both. But the presentation, like people underestimate what goes into that, trying to communicate that, making sure you haven't missed anything, making sure that like everything's there that needs to be there. So it's a massive undertaking. And I assume for you doing those types of things for the clients that you have, it's even more intense because you're sharing data that they've gathered over years of research. You're showing things that are like super life-changing with big impact companies. So yeah, it's a pretty important job.
It is. It's a really cool though job. And I think the thing about it that I love is right, it's so meaningful. It
Yeah.
really is to the people that you're doing it for, to their end clients, to whoever's doing the fund, right? Like all across the board, like it has so much meaning to be able to do it the right way. And
Yeah.
even and for you and your end clients, right? Like when people are making an investment in interior design, that is no small investment from actually hiring someone. I mean, the commitment there to the buying the pieces, like it's a whole process. And they're going to live with those things for a long time.
Yeah.
And so, and it's their home. Like there is nothing I can imagine more important to invest in than your home, right? Like
Yeah. No, and it's
built
funny
for
because it's
everything.
people, they're like, oh, so fun. You get to pick colors, you get to do like, you get to pick pillows, and you're like, no, but like these people are giving me like they're like probably one of the largest, like if they're doing a full renovation, it's like the biggest investment they've made beyond buying their home. Like
Right.
hundreds of thousands of dollars are going into this to create a space that, as you said, you have to live with for like 15-20 years usually is what people go between for renovations. And that's a lot of pressure to like make sure that you're like getting the vibe right, that you're like embracing all members of the family, that you're understanding their lifestyle and how they use the space, not only like how it looks. So there's a lot that we take into account as well for that.
And that they understand it,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
then
I don't
just
know about
that
you.
part and then trying to
I'm all
explain it.
digital. So you're like, I can't even imagine if now we were like, okay, now we have to take this into real life. And there's a whole other tactile component of like, oh, but now that color is slightly different than I thought it would be, or the
Oh
texture is
yeah.
slightly different. Like I can't
Like
even,
the light coming in is
the chair
different.
is I
So,
thought it would be like 2 inches taller from the picture, like
oh, there's a lot of that.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of
Just
that.
like
Yeah.
little things of like, and especially when you've, to your point, like when you've spent that much money and made that kind of investment, like we bought our house, and it's funny because like we did a walkthrough and they were like, look at everything. And I was like, yeah, everything's here. And now we've been here 2.5 years, and I'll notice where like there's little parts of the wall where the paint's just a little thinner. And I'm like, really, how lazy were they? And I was like, they gave you a chance, Adrienne, and you walked around and you were like, it's fine. But you don't notice those things, right? Until you're like
Yeah.
really in it and you're like, oh, where it drives me crazy that this chair is 2 inches lower, and I didn't notice before, but like it
Yeah.
is just a little too low for this counter. And
No,
maybe it's
it's,
somebody's too tall or somebody's too short or whatever, but it's the livability suddenly
yes.
is a different factor that you can't even account for in the planning. It's difficult
Yeah.
to account for in the planning stage.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jumping over to the entrepreneurial side, do you own the business that you run?
I do.
Okay. So let's talk about that for a minute because you are basically our target audience for this podcast. You're a creative entrepreneur, you're doing creative work as well as running a business. So, what is the most challenging thing about running a business? And what is the most, I know you mentioned obviously the work you do is very rewarding and it's very meaningful. So, the most challenging thing and maybe the most, I don't, maybe the word's distracting. Like, what do you find hard to balance?
Um, Most challenging thing. I know for most people it's getting clients. I've been very lucky. I SEO optimized my website 3 months in, and within 6 months I was getting leads, two a day roughly. And so I've been very blessed that that's never been a problem I've had. My husband always laughs because I'll be like, I got another lead. And he's like, you're the only person in the world that complains about getting too many leads. And I'm like, at some
Yeah.
point, right, when you're busy, you're just like, yeah, you're like, oh, it's just, I'm tired of even responding to people. But I would say, from a challenging standpoint, when you do have leads and you have that stability, there also comes the challenge of like, what do I do with this? And part of that was, how do I monetize it? So, right, like, do I move up market, charge higher prices? And there's some, internal work that you have to do, the confidence, the also making sure that your product is standing up to what those new rates are, that people are going to be happy with that. There's the boundaries that come with that, right? Well, if I'm charging more, does that mean that people get access to me on nights and weekends? No. Okay. But with every, like, I feel like every kind of element of little rise and growth in the business, I go through that again. Like, I feel like I have to do more. And then I learn you don't actually. So it's really kind of like battling with myself, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And my own boundaries and my own comfortability with maintaining them, I guess, is really the very long-winded way of saying that. But I've been working on that. And the good news is the oscillations, as opposed to being so high, they go up and down in a much lower area range. And then the thing I get most distracted by, oh, that's a tough one. I don't know that I tend to get too distracted.
Like if you had, say, 5 accounts you had to invoice that day and you also had a presentation you had to work on, like, do you get stuck in the creative? I guess that's kind of more my question. Like, is there anything you avoid doing or don't like doing in the business?
Yeah, I would always prioritize end client work over administrative work, but I like getting paid. So that work that's going to get done. It's just, when does that get done? And it will get done on a Friday night at 6 or 7 o'clock at night or something, but it will
Yeah.
get done. um, so yeah, there's nothing I wouldn't say that's too crazy. I guess if there was anything, like, I would put off like social media. And so most of that, like, I learned early on too. I don't need it from a marketing perspective, like from a lead generation perspective, but I do need it from a, hey, you're alive. I always say, like, people's websites, they're
Yes.
there, but like, you can go to somebody's website and you don't have a sense if that website is 10 years old or 30
It's
years old.
a authentication thing. It's like
Yes.
same for us. Like, you'd think as a designer, like, you're getting a ton of leads from Instagram. It's like, no, people on
Yeah.
Instagram are liking your pictures. And then they're like, what paint color is that? Where did you get that chair? And you're like, somebody paid me $5,000 to pick that paint color. So you're not getting that answer unless you want to pay too. But that's
I
kind of what,
love that.
well, it's, to me, that's like client respect. Like, that is like,
Right.
like, I have a completely different website where we sell like pre-curated designs where you get the paint color, the furniture. It's $44. You get it, run with it, have fun with it.
Yeah.
It's great, but it's like, you can't take what's a custom for someone else and like get it for, for free. I'm not an influencer. That's not how I make my money. I don't make affiliate marketing on like selling a
Right.
chair. So it's a whole different thing. But if somebody found me or somebody recommended me, say to their neighbor, and then their neighbor went on Instagram and they don't see me anywhere, I only have 200 followers and like 3 posts, they're going to be like, is that even her job? Like, does she even have clients? Like, does she do it for fun? Is it a
Exactly.
hobby? So it's an authentication thing that you have to have, especially for design, like even, graphic design, what you do for sure. You have to be like, look at these amazing clients I'm working with, look at these amazing presentations I'm doing. But like, it's not, people aren't probably finding you there being like, I'm going on Instagram today to find somebody to make an amazing presentation for me. They're like, where are
Exactly.
the dog videos?
Exactly. No, I'm 100% with you. And the number of times somebody's referred me to someone and I've gone and looked for their Instagram and been like, you don't have anything? Like, I don't really know if you're really doing this, to your point. Like, is this just a side hustle? So yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah. And so would put that off. And so I don't know, I have like years worth of content that kind of recycles. And then I'll post stuff randomly when I'm inspired. But so I guess that would be the big thing that I very quickly realized was going to be a problem. And so, but I'm a process person, right? There
Yeah.
is that analytical side where I'm like, well, I can't let that be a problem. So how do I fix that? And
Yeah.
so I got motivated for 3 days and I was like, I will do a year's worth of stuff.
That's awesome. So talk to me a little bit about those two things, because that's really impressive actually, because content is very hard to create. And you said you recycle. So talk to me about recycling content and talk to me about how you optimize your site for SEO, because I think a lot of people struggle with that too. And if you're getting 2 leads a day, that's really awesome.
Yes. Okay. So we'll start with the recycling. So yeah, I went through and I said, okay, like, what do I say that, there's some stuff about PowerPoint. There's some like little comedic content about PowerPoint. There's some quotes about design. Like it's pretty generic content. But again, if you aren't following me for a full year, you're not going to realize it's recycling. I laugh because I'm like, anybody who actually like cares about me, they'll be like, I saw that already. And you're like, I know, but you have to really be paying attention to realize that. So you're one of 4 people in the world who's noticed that.
Yes.
You're part of the club.
And that's
I
to
use,
that, sorry to interrupt, but to
no,
that
you're fine.
point, that's a huge thing, because I didn't realize that for a long time. And I say this in the podcast quite a bit, is that nobody gives a shit what you're doing. Like nobody's watching you the way you think people are watching you. And so you're absolutely right. I posted like the same bathroom, say like 4 weeks apart. And like my very best friend who like watches everything is like, I saw that bathroom already. And you're like, oh shit. And I like deleted it. And I was like, I didn't mean to do that. But when you think about it, it's like that one part, like my one best friend, who cares if she sees the bathroom twice?
Yeah,
But
because
like,
she's a freaking Hawkeye who loves you. And you're like, but the
yes,
rest of the world is not getting your stuff because Instagram does not care enough to show it to them all the time.
exactly. So I think that's a very good point. Sorry, I just wanted to highlight that.
No, I love that because it's so true. It's because it's my best friend who does the same thing. She's like, are you serious? You're posting that video again? I mean, stop following me. You are not
Yeah.
the audience.
Go
That's
follow
who
my
I
personal
posted.
account. Yeah.
I use a tool called Smarter Q, but I think HubSpot, there are a number of other tools that'll do it. And then for SEO, so I got a course. It was called Stupid Simple SEO. It was a blogging course. So the thing about SEO, what I tell people is SEO sounds like this big, complicated thing, right? And the reason it is a big, complicated thing. If you are trying to get millions of page views to make ad revenue, right? But that's not what I needed. I'm just me. I need, 10 people a day or something. Like I don't need ad revenue. I need actual people. And so I couldn't service that many people if they showed up and were knocking at my door. So what I did is I went and looked for keywords that were really low difficulty and relatively low volume as well. So like 100 to 500. And I optimized my site for those keywords. And optimizing your site on page is like 5 things. People think it's like all this crazy stuff. And you're like, no, you put it in like your site title, your H1 tag, and then you pepper it throughout your site in a couple places. You make sure it's in like your alt text. It's really not that hard. I think the harder part then is you have to get backlinks to your site. So, that's doing some guest blogging or being quoted in some articles and things like that. But again, you don't have to have a ton of those if you've picked a relatively low difficulty keyword with a relatively low volume. It's not competitive. And so I was ranking within 3 months and like really ranking within 6 for freelance presentation designer. And it's had a keyword difficulty of, I don't know, like 5 and a volume of 150 or something. But
Okay.
then once you start ranking for that and you're getting leads, so Google sees that people are clicking through, filling out your lead form, it starts testing you to rank for other related keywords.
Okay.
So then I started ranking for other things as well. But that's what I recommend. You can go and get their free keyword tools if you go search for them, or certainly like relatively low cost subscription tools. And the filters you would search for low keyword difficulty or whatever the comparable term is on every search engine tools, keyword tool is going to be different, and low volume, but you want it to have high buyer intent as well. So like I went freelance presentation designer because someone's going to be searching to buy, like they want to hire somebody. You don't just search presentation designer because that's people, if you go look at the search results for that, the search results are people who are looking for how much does a presentation designer make? How much do you pay a presentation designer? What does a presentation designer do? How do you turn on PowerPoint's presentation designer tool? Like it's all across the board. And so if you
Okay.
target the wrong keyword, it looks like a good keyword, but if you go look at the actual search results, you see it's not really aligned with what you want. And
Yes.
so you'll end up one, it'll be difficult to rank for because it's too high difficulty and too high volume. And then two, you won't actually get in traffic. Like it's
Yeah.
not the traffic you want.
Interesting. I think that's probably the largest struggle for most people is that they don't necessarily think about those things. They're like, okay, you know, interior design ideas. And it's like the people who are looking for ideas aren't technically looking to hire an interior designer, right? Like it's you have to think through that thought process and also kind of, yeah, it's interesting. So that stupid simple SEO, that's a course that you took?
Yep. It's for bloggers, so it's really robust. It was definitely way more than I needed. But the guy who runs it is really super smart. He's built multiple blogging sites that some of them he sold. He's been really successful and stays on top of the latest trends. So like he does updates all the time to it and things like that on like, hey, Google did an update and like this is what you need to know
Okay.
coming up.
That's interesting. And I think, yeah, especially if you're just starting out, like I don't know how I got a good Google ranking. I honestly like didn't do a lot of SEO. Somehow it worked for me, but it's I think especially if you're just starting out and you're just building your website, I think it's that would be a great tool to use for sure. Um, Blogging, do you blog?
I have a couple of blog posts on my site.
Okay.
A couple of them are SEO optimized. They've never ranked particularly well. It was never a goal of mine, right? I wanted the homepage to rank, and I had enough traffic from that. So it's never anything I really invested the time in.
Okay. Because a lot of people say like you should like blogging is great. And I'm like, oh God, another thing I have to do.
Yeah. And I think, again, like it's about what your goals are and how you're going to invest that time. You can do all the things. It's to what end? I
Hmm.
always ask people, like, if you enjoy being on Instagram and doing reels every day and go do it. Like, if you're going to I don't enjoy it. I don't want to blog. I don't want to have 30,000 things. Like, my business is great. Like, I did the things. Figure out how to make it work for you. You can build a business very easily that is the wrong business, that is a business you hate every bit as much as the full-time job you used to have. Like, why would you do that to yourself?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Like, be intentional.
Absolutely.
Build the type of business that you want to have.
Absolutely. What did you do before you started your business?
I did a number of things. I started, I worked, I did cafe training for Starbucks right after college. In college, I was doing training, and then continued doing that right after school. And then I started working from some startups in Atlanta. So I was kind of in that fundraising space. And then after that, went to work for one of the investment companies that was funding those companies. And then after that, that's when I left and started my own business. So I kind of have that
Cool.
like financial background, the startup, like it's
Yeah.
an interesting space to kind of know those worlds and like the research space and all that.
I always like to know like where people come from because I also had like a whole other life before that, or before what I'm doing now. And it teaches you different things that you're never going to learn like when you're like in this space for per se, right? Like it's very
Yeah,
interesting to have those different perspectives from different, not only different careers, but also just like different types of places, right? Like it's very cool to see how that all kind of ties together in the fabric of like what you're creating. Um,
absolutely. And a journey that you never thought when you started out your career. Like people want this like clearly defined career path. And you're like, I don't know, I kind of rambled and somehow ended up here and it's worked out beautifully.
the best stories and like the most successful people I speak to always have that rambling, like a little taste here or a little bite there. Like that's the most successful people have those types of stories. My AirPods just died. Having a day, man. I'm having a day. So, okay. So for where can people find you? Tell us where we can look for you, where we can follow you. If people are interested in hiring you, where can they find you?
At adriennejohnston.com. That's ADRIENNEJOHNSTON.com,
Amazing.
or Adrienne B. Johnston on Instagram.
Okay, amazing. It's funny. The girl that works for me who also loves also loves PowerPoint is named Adrienne. Spelled the same
No,
as you.
it must be something in the stars.
Yes, it's like you're being born now. Your name is Adrienne. You will love PowerPoint. You'll be very good at it. Amazing. Okay. And thank you so much for being here. That was really interesting. I think it's a lot of really practical advice that people can use. And then definitely if you're listening, go check out the YouTube if you want to see the presentation portion of the call where I show Adrienne the presentation we do and we kind of walk through that. Any last words of advice for our young entrepreneurs coming up the ladder here?
I always just tell people, just get started. You'll learn as you go. You'll make mistakes. It'll be fine. But if you don't know, it's kind of like the journey thing, right? Like you don't know what you don't know, and you won't know what you like. You don't know what works for you until you just try it.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the time. And it was really lovely chatting with you.
Thank you for having me.